Good morning. I'm really pleased to be joined by Stephen Taylor this morning. Stephen, thank you very much for giving up your time.
No problem. Thanks very much for having me.
Pleasure. So before we go through the questions, just to give a bit of a context for people who are watching and listening. So FMCG in earlier career, and then a very impressive career as Chief Marketing Officer with a variety of companies, including PayPal and HMD, which is home of Nokia phones, and then most recently with Pizza Express. So a very experienced marketer, and I've got some questions for you so we can understand a bit about that. So I think probably the best place to start is really curious about your career journey, why marketing appealed, and it would be fantastic to kind of get a bit of an insight as to how it all came about.
I guess first and foremost, I got into marketing, and it's actually probably started sales and marketing because I like the whole multifaceted and breadth of where you could go with it. So I think that was the big attraction. And I think I've sort of tried to build on that through the career. So lucky, I got into a great organisation in Gillette. I managed to have experiences that took me, from local to global to regional roles within different brands. I worked on Gillette, Oral-B, Braun Electricals, and that was a great grounding. And then we got bought by Procter & Gamble. So another great adventure with FMCG. Got the opportunity to work across Pampers, a number of the large brands that they had in the P&G network. And again, it was just another reinvention of marketing for me. It was FMCG, but Procter & Gamble came at it with a very specific way, and we made sure that Gillette's strengths were brought into that. So actually, it was almost 20 years of my career was this FMCG training ground. And when I got to that amount of time, I did think I really should be trying something else. And then I've had some great opportunities since. So I went to Samsung, so got into technology, consumer electronics, telcos. And again, that was right when the brand had worked out how to make mobile phones. So that took off, and that was fascinating. And we had to digitize that business, which was great. I had 4 years there. I then wanted another challenge, and I went off to PayPal, which was payments and fintech. No physical product for the first time in my career. Very digital, very segmented and detailed targeting of customers. And then the next journey was to Nokia, where I think everybody that's listening is convinced that it's gone away as a brand, but privately owned business called HMD owned the license, and we were trying to resurrect it. So took it down to sustainability and huge fun, but very hard to break through in that market when you've got the people I know like Samsungs and the Apples spending absolute fortunes. And then latterly, very lucky to have spent 12 months on the Pizza Express brand, which for me was coming back home to a brand that I really loved, and actually spent 12 months doing a decent reinvigoration of that as a brand. We revamped the look, the feel, the tone of voice, grocery range, and all the way through I think I'd love challenging myself with varied categories, and I'd encourage people to try and do that because it really adds to your skill set.
Oh, thank you for that. And even back at university, did you know you wanted to, because you read economics, didn't you, at university? Did you know then that you wanted to go into marketing?
To be fair, I probably stumbled into it more through opportunity. And it was actually when I was going through types of job, I think I even had merchant banking on my list, and then realised I wasn't cut out for that. And then I did a few milk round type exercises, and the Gillette opportunity came up. And when I got into it, I thought this is definitely for me, and I was right. I made the right choice.
I bet your educational background with economics has proven invaluable, though, in the way of analysing data, in the way that the way that the world works now.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I was lucky enough to get sponsored to do an MBA, which almost reinvigorated that mid-career for me. And I think some of the principles of economics and finance, I think, are super important for marketers to understand, because ultimately the people that are pulling the purse strings need to know that you're commercial and astute and you're not going to be wasting their money. And the more you've got that in your background, I think it really helps.
I couldn't agree more. And certainly we look at all the briefs that we have now, and all of these senior marketing roles, the clients are looking for people who are able to make data-driven decisions, really strong on the analysis side. It's the way it's all going. So you've worked with some exceptional brands, and I'm really curious. You might not be able to limit to one, but is there one kind of standout campaign that you've worked on that's memorable for you?
I could take the liberty of probably quoting two. And actually, if I go back over my career, there's an amazing amount of campaigns, particularly in the FMCG and into Samsung, where it was almost, you were always going to be on above the line advertising. I've actually enjoyed the ones where you've convinced the business to go back to advertising when it's maybe gone a bit quiet. And PayPal was a good example of that. A well-known brand, but was living very much in the digital sphere, and I think had lost a little bit of relevance for customers. And we were able to have this new capability on the app, which was peer-to-peer payments, and we did it for free. And I convinced the business to go back onto TV with that, and it was brilliant because it just reinvigorated people's awareness. We got great traction and engagement with the app, and really drove downloads. So, and I was quite proud of that, which was good. And actually, just in the last 12 months, we took Pizza Express back to out-of-home advertising in Northwest, just to see what impact you could have with a brand refresh, which again, everybody knows the brand. And again, the results came through, and people just liked the fact we were back out there talking about the brand, talking about the products that they loved, whether it was the dough balls, the American hot. So again, decent levels of pride over these two more recent ones, I'd say.
You've listed the two I like.
And that wasn't set up, was it, Suzie?
It wasn't, genuinely, it wasn't. Pizza is my weakness. So the marketing teams are going through, lots of change, but particularly kind of huge technological change at the moment now. And I'm just curious as the leader. I mean, you had a huge, you've managed huge teams. I think most recent teams sort of 50 odd people. Yeah, so big teams. How do you manage teams through these times of great change?
I think the one thing to do is, have perspective that change has been around for a long time. And, I think even from Samsung days, it was about digitizing CRM, social media, is that going to be a thing? And I think there's just waves of change come through marketers. And there's an element of me is like, keep calm, because everybody's convinced they're behind the curve. But try and just get the right expertise around you about where you need to go next, whether it's your marketing tech stack, your performance marketing, is your CRM now as personalized as it could be? And I think it's just having that healthy intellectual curiosity to make sure you're at least, at parity or above your peers. And actually, quite often, the best therapy is speak to your peers and realize everybody's convinced that they've got gaps in where they are. And I almost go, just navigate it at pace, get great people around you that are experts in specific fields. And I had a boss that was great, saying, if you think you've got an elephant, to eat that, you just dice it down into little chunks. And I think that's the way you look at it, because otherwise it becomes overwhelming. And I think people just need to keep calm, break it down, and attack each sort of area in its own way.
No, I like that. Good practical advice. Then you mentioned about, joke about social media. Everyone was looking back then, is that still going to be around? And crikey, the way that social media continues to reinvent itself. I think, TikTok shopping channels, probably one of the latest things that we're going to be seeing, has massive influence on these brands now. It's fascinating.
That's the bit always going back and checking yourself, is it's almost that identifying your audience and where are they interacting, and make sure you're across their channels, because not all these channels are the same impact for all brands. And again, that's where sometimes people get a little bit lost, is that everybody feels they have to be on TikTok. Might not be top of the list for every brand, but that's the curiosity, is like, keep across your audience and what they're doing.
And what about priorities for senior marketers? So, 2024, what do you think will be priorities for, chief marketing officers, chief customer officers for this year?
You probably still have to acknowledge, economic headwinds. I don't think we're due a hugely bright future in the near term. And I think playing out in that is obviously the demands towards sustainability and the need for value, and actually how you can make your brand operate in quite a tricky environment in that sense. So again, it goes back to understanding where you're playing out with your value for money. Are you on the sustainability requirements that a lot of customers, particularly the younger generation, are almost demanding? And then on top of that, just making sure you are abreast of all the technological and channel changes that are going on in the world. So I think those are the three things I'd think about.
Good answer there, like that. And what about advice? So particularly, I usually ask about advice for people sort of very early on in their career, but what about advice for people who have set their sights on that CMO role? So, they might be a fairly experienced head of, or they might be a marketing director, but they've got within their sights that chief marketing officer role. Any advice you can share?
I'd say if you're committed to it, just be, very mindful of the breadth of the role. And it can vary by organisation, but it's quite a broad role. And I'd almost say just make sure you've got the set of skills that you feel that once you get there, you don't feel that you've got certain things are lacking. So if you've always been overly on the creative side, make sure you understand performance marketing, the digital aspects. If you haven't done a great deal of e-commerce, try and get yourself a bit more well-versed. So I think it's just making yourself, stand out from your peers via having a broad set of skills that somebody will look at you and say you're a unique position. And sometimes I say, be careful what you ask for, because it has a decent amount of pressure. And I've had people work for me going, I'm not sure I could do your job. And, sometimes you go, yeah, there are times it's tough.
Well, fair enough. About being honest with, careful what you wish for and be honest. And what about mindset? You're a very, calm, positive character, very energized. I'm always curious. I think any kind of senior leader who's successful is positive, has good structures and routines. We often all have our sort of habits. If you got any hints or tips or anything that you use that would be useful to others?
I think blind optimism might be a bit extreme of it, but I think you have to go with a view of positivity, because if you can't be positive, how do you expect your teams to be? I think that's comes with a bit of resilience, because times can be tough, and it was only jovial about careful what you ask for to be a CMO, but you do have to take on quite a lot. And I think keeping positive, in a sense, even when things might be really tough, I quite often call it the swan. If you can look all serene, but your legs are pedaling underneath, that is how you have to think of it. And I think, almost never forget that you don't know all the answers. And certainly when things change so much as they are now, still be humble and listen to teams and encourage them to help you come up with the answers, because trying to do it on your own is never going to be a good route, and it's quite lonely. So I think always keeping that humble mindset and encouraging everybody else to get across the problems that you're seeing in front of you.
I like that very much. Stephen, what an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for spending the time and answering the questions. And I'm very, very grateful to you.
Thank you again for having me, and my pleasure as well.